Hong Kong protesters are charged with rioting, yet despite arrests and violence, the demonstrations show no signs of slowing down. But what are protesters hoping to achieve? I'm Imran Garta, and today's Newsmaker is the escalating unrest in Hong Kong. For more than 8 consecutive weeks, Hong Kongers have been demanding democratic reforms and greater freedoms. The protests started peacefully, but in recent weeks, things have taken a sinister turn. In one of the worst cases of violence the territory has seen in years, commuters were attacked at a train station. The victims claim the police were happy to turn a blind eye. The subsequent protests that condemned police inaction were swiftly snuffed out. And as skirmishes broke out across the city, demonstrators were rounded up and some now face a decade in jail. But even though the public's trust in the police force dwindles, Hong Kong's law enforcement still has the backing of Beijing. In a rare public statement, China's central government reiterated its support for Hong Kong's embattled leader Carrie and sent a stark warning to protesters: end the unrest or pay the price. Natalie Perhernan reports.
This was Tuesday night in Hong Kong. Protests have become the new normal here, but this was in response to the authorities' change in tactics. Pro-democracy demonstrators surrounded a police station to support their own. For the first time since the wave of protests began, prosecutors have charged people with rioting. 44 demonstrators were charged over protests on Sunday that turned violent. If found guilty, they could face up to 10 years in prison.
Using these draconian rules will not heal Hong Kong, although they may have the backup from Beijing. But clearly, this kind of condition will only elevate the violence. Young people will only become more united.
The protest started as a pushback against an extradition bill that would have allowed criminal suspects to be sent to mainland China for trial. They've morphed into what some have called Hong Kong's greatest political crisis and a backlash against Beijing's influence. Demonstrators have continued their calls for greater democracy and the resignation of the city's leader, Carrie. It's raised concerns that mainland authorities could intervene in the territory, which is a part of China, but has a high degree of autonomy. They've made it clear that they're backing the Hong Kong government.
The Chinese government firmly supports the SAR's government to govern in accordance with the law, firmly supports Hong Kong's police in punishing violent criminals according to law, and safeguarding Hong Kong's peace, security and stability.
But Beijing also has this message for who it calls the radical individuals responsible for the situation.
They've also crossed the red line of one country, two systems. They should by no means be tolerated.
The anti-government protests in Hong Kong began as peaceful demonstrations. They've been growing more violent as the weeks progress. But one incident stands out. On July 21, the usually quiet town of Yuen Long near the Chinese border turned into a battleground. Men accused of being gang members went on a rampage at a train station. Some of the commuters had been returning from an anti-government rally. Others were simply on the subway. Calls for help from emergency services went unanswered. Police arrived after the attackers had left. By that time, 45 people had been injured. Some critics have accused the police of colluding with the mob behind the attack. Police deny the allegation. The following week, demonstrators came to the area to protest against the violence in Yuen Long. That march had been banned by authorities, but that didn't stop it from going ahead. One more sign of the ever-widening fractures in Hong Kong society. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Hong Kong is Lam Cheuk Ting. He's a member of the Legislative Council with the Democratic Party and was a victim of the attack at Yuen Long Station. Edward Chin was a leader of Hong Kong's Occupy Central movement and is now the convener of 2047 HK Monitor, a movement that says it's striving for true democracy. And in Beijing is China affairs analyst Xu Qinduo. We invited a representative of Hong Kong's police force onto the show, but they declined our request, unfortunately. Okay, gentlemen, let's begin. Edward Chin, 44 people charged with rioting. Is that a strong sign of things to come and the fact that this will be clamped down upon?
Well, honestly, this is unprecedented. So many people charged with rioting. And honestly, this whole thing started with the extradition bill and it progressed into something bigger. And I believe this is a fight for Hong Kong. Now, it's also, I think, Beijing should really think deeply because they came out just a few days ago saying the same thing, reiterate the same thing, saying that the one country, two systems, it should be intact. But you know, the way Hong Kongers feel, it's that right now Hong Kong is under duress. And in order to stop this, I think Carrie Lam should come out and speak to the people. And she deliberately tried to hide away and then let the Hong Kong police run Hong Kong. And I think it's quite scary. Now, my office is in Central, and I see that the police, definitely they should have a more restraint, but it's definitely not showing the restraint that's seen. And in Yuen Long, when I saw Lam Cheuk Ting being beaten up, it's shown from all different news media. It is saddening to see this happen.
So let's ask Lam Cheuk Ting. Firstly, who beat you up? Is it absolutely clear? And why did they beat you up?
You can see my hand injury. I got a bone fracture and my mouth had a deep cut by a baton attack. I strongly believe those attackers were gangsters in Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong police force deliberately allowed them to assemble outside the MTR station and attack us for so long. And after the attack, the police force just let those suspected attackers who were holding batons on their hand to leave without any arrest. So it is a very serious gangster attack in Hong Kong.
Did they say anything when they beat you up?
Yes, they warned me and the other passenger in the train, don't come to Yuen Long again. And I do believe most of the people in the train and the train station were not protesters of the movement. They are just the passenger returning home.
Xu Qinduo, before we look into the politics of it all and the ever-changing dynamics on the ground, do you accept that it was wrong for whoever did this to beat up Lam Cheuk Ting?
I would say violence is not welcome. Violence is wrong. Whether it is on the Yuen Long side, the local residents, they are fed up with the endless protest. And just as they said, don't come to Yuen Long. Basically, don't protest on my backyard. And of course, you see also rioting on the protester side. You see the storming of the legislative council.
Let me clarify. We are
and
not,
also the defacement of the emblem. So you see this violent acts by these protesters too, and also the emblem over there, be defacement of the national emblem. That's a lot of anger too. For any issue, there are people who are against, there are people who are pro. So that's, I would say, natural. But the things like Hong Kong, what Hong Kong really need is for the protesters. The very beginning, the reason is extradition bill. The bill is shelved. And I think it's a time for them to retreat and talk to the government.
So
and
Lam
what
wants
are their
to.
demands
So Lam
so
Cheuk
we
Ting
can
wants
solve
to come
this
in. Okay,
problem.
Lam Cheuk Ting. So the message we're getting from the mainland, certainly, the message we're getting from the mainland and the message that we're getting from the police force is that Sure, while there might be a lot of protesters, there are also a lot of rioters who are causing a lot of damage and are being violent themselves. Address that for me.
First of all, I would like to clarify. Those people in MTR station under attack, most of them are not protesters. And the protesters were returning home. We did not have any protest at that station. So I would like to clarify this point first. And of course, you can see some protests in Hong Kong in recent months. And it is because the government tried to continue the legislation without listening to 1 million Hong Kong people protest. And after that, the government refused to completely withdraw the legislation. And also, because so many protesters were arrested and the government insisted to prosecute them. Just yesterday, as you mentioned, 44 people were prosecuted for rioting. I strongly believe such charges in such short investigation will further provoke Hong Kong people to strongly oppose the government.
Mm-hmm. Edward Chin, as was mentioned, it started with the extradition bill that has been shelved, as Shu Kin-duo mentioned. So now what is it about? What's at the heart of the protest?
I believe Hong Kong people, they don't trust Beijing, period. Because when you use the word like a shelve it, they put it to a pause. This is different from like a true, put it like a retraction. This is not like retracting from the bill, right? So this is like playing the DVD player. So you put it to a pause, you can play it again. But I guess the bottom line here too, it's when the other guests use the word like a riot, you know, I think it's the wrong word because it's quite clear that like if you use the word riot, people would like storm a retail shop. We have not seen anything like that, right?
But we have seen some violence, right? So again, we want to put this into perspective, right? And we want to assign the proportionality accurately. It's not absolutely clear just to what extent people were violent, but we've had the white shirts movement, police reports where they say people are damaging lampposts, attacking police officers with bricks, iron rods, wooden planks. You don't dispute that this is happening. It is happening, right? It's a minority, but it is happening. Do you accept that?
It is happening. It is a tactic that Beijing like to play. People fighting people, and then they will come up with another escalated scheme, you know, just to clamp down on Hong Kong. I see like Hong Kong police back in the 80s. People loved them. It was very corrupted, like back in the 60s and early 70s. And then the ICAC came in force and then to make Hong Kong a more lovely city. But then you see, like, you know, when you see a police officer holding a Remington shotgun, you know, like pointing at people,
sure. But
this is unprecedented.
But at a point in time when protesters start to actually storm the legislative buildings, what choice do they have, really?
The kids, they are running out of choice because they see we're living in a society that's extremely bipolar. And then, you know, the way when I read it, it's when they see 2047 coming, they get less than 28 years. And then Beijing is not keeping the promise, just like what Deng Xiaoping promised. Now, I relocate back to Hong Kong in the year 2000. I believe in Deng Xiaoping's version of one country, two systems is you could have your horse betting, you could have your dancing, and then you could critique the communist government. No problem, because it's under one country, two systems now. But the kids that were born after 1997 or even a few years before 1997, they have not witnessed what Tiananmen did to the people. And of course, you know, like even within mainland China, when Tiananmen, if you ask the newer, the millenniums, they don't know what happened 30 years ago. And they don't see, you know, the Tibet clamp down in 1959.
Okay. So,
you know, like one quarter of the...
So at the heart of all of this, and sorry to interrupt you, at the heart of all of this, Shu Kin-duo, we're hearing that Hong Kongers don't trust Beijing. They feel that Beijing wants to swallow them up. maybe sooner than even expected, even if that was an inevitability. And that's why they will continue to protest until they have their full rights being materialized and exercised. They have a point, don't they?
You made a good point. I agree with you. Yes, there is a deeply entrenched distrust of the central government, of the mainland, of China, of the Chinese. And also there's, to a certain degree, confrontation. You can see the mainlanders, when they arrive in Hong Kong, they are obviously being challenged by some local people. But that's, I would say, natural part of integration. You know, Hong Kong is part of China, remember. Hong Kong will always be part of China. The issue is, right now, already 8 weekends, seems to be endless protests. Will protests solve this problem? These are big problems. And also remember, if you look at the whole time during this protesting, the Chinese central government has maintained basically silent or stand with the local government. There's nothing wrong for them to do. They know Hong Kong affairs and the formula, one country, two system. Hong Kong affairs will be managed by the Hong Kong government, by the Hong Kong people. So there's no intervention, no interference from Beijing.
Okay,
and the people are accessing their rights and freedoms. You see, there's no freedom, no rights. No, I want to make this point. People are accessing their rights and freedoms. So they say they don't have freedom and rights?
Yeah, but their point is that when they are protesting, they're being charged with rioting and being thrown in jail, and they potentially face a decade in jail for this. Let me get
Hong Kong.
Let me get the response from Lam Chik-ting. Let me get the response from him. We've got time, so you can come back in, Shu Kin-duo. The point, Lam Chik-ting, is that we're hearing from Shu Kin-duo that there's no interference whatsoever from Beijing. These decisions are being made in Hong Kong by Carrie Lam's government. Do you dispute that?
I can't agree with that, because without the support of the central government, Carrie Lam would not insist the legislation for so long. And talking about the interference by the central government in Hong Kong, we Hong Kong people clearly understand how deep it is. And to my understanding, the Beijing keeps interfering with the Hong Kong domestic affairs, including they try to control Hong Kong media, try to control the NGO, the civil servants, and any public bodies and the law enforcement agencies. And talking about the Yunnan attack, just 2 weeks before that, the top official of the Beijing liaison office in Hong Kong attended the ceremony in Hong Kong, and he encouraged those village leaders to defend Yunnan from any protest. I do believe it is a political message sent by the liaison office to encourage those village power to so-called do something to deal with the protests. And we Hong Kong people strongly oppose the interference of the mainland China.
Shu, did Beijing incite the violence in Yunnan?
For Beijing would do everything for the betterment of Hong Kong. Because if Hong Kong gets better, stabler, peaceful, and prosperous, nothing would be best. Nothing would be better than that. Because the whole country will benefit from a better Hong Kong. And also, if China does better, Hong Kong will benefit from being part of China. So there's no whatever incentive for China to interfere or to make things worse in Hong Kong, remember. And also, you talk about this, the rioters being arrested. Look, the violence against the policeman, the police force, one of the policeman's fingers top was bitten off by the rioters. You say they should be enjoy, say, like an amnesty. That's one of their demands.
But I don't know the circumstances of where those fingers were.
One of the most precious things.
Certainly, okay. We don't know where those fingers were going, right? Edward Chin, you want to respond?
When you talk about the finger biting, the riot police tried to poke the eyeball out of a protester. This is something that we have not seen. And then the police get very violent too. Like we have to look on both sides. And honestly, I think it's more from a top-down level. And in order to make the 2047, the 28 years shortened to maybe even halfway through the 2047, the 50 years that Deng Xiaoping promised. They are using different tactics, and then that scared finance people, because you could see quite recently, even Singapore talked about, the Monetary Authority of Singapore half jokingly saying that, hey, the Singapore bank don't try to take advantage of the Hong Kong situation and don't grab the assets. So we know that things are coming, and the assets are also going to Switzerland. So we, as Hong Kong people, we know that if one country, two systems is not intact anymore, this hurts Hong Kong. But the other guests, I think I have to point out that since you're also from China originally, right? Now, why do a lot of Chinese people flee China? It's because they don't trust the system. It's still ruled by law. It's not.
No, it's totally wrong. Remember how many people went overseas like every year? Like more than 100 billion people, 1 million people go overseas, and then the absolute majority of them come back to China. Why? And all you see, the foreign direct investment in China increased every year. Why? They are leaving Hong Kong because Hong Kong, of course, with the endless protest, for every business people would be worried. Should I put my money in Hong Kong? No, because there's no stability, no peace.
Most of the people from the CCP told me that, money that's sitting inside Hong Kong is not safe, and they're moving their money to Singapore because of CRS, Common Reporting Standards, and they don't trust your government.
Okay.
Well, period. I don't know where you're located.
I don't know where you get
you being where you are now.
I don't know where you get your message, your information.
Okay,
you get the information from CIA.
We're gonna dig a bit deeper and follow the money and see who's right, because this is an interesting subplot. Listen, I want us to have a little listen to one of the protesters for a second. Let's have a listen.
It's really easy to come through a riot charge, and part of the reason is because riot charge is a collective crime. So even the person who are charging didn't do any inciting violence or didn't do any behavior violent, they are still held accountable to others' behavior. And I think this is wrong. This tells you this system is rigged, and there is some problem in the systems, because people should be accountable to their own individual act. But now the government is using a collective crime to claim a peaceful protest as a violent protest, and then arrest everyone and then charge them with riots.
So Lam Cheuk Tung, what we heard there from one of the protesters who was arrested and then released was, he felt there's a collective punishment at play here, and that it's very deliberate under these rioting charges. Do you agree with that?
Yes, because for the rioting, any person who attend the protest and arrested on site, he may be seen, he may be prosecuted for rioting, despite he or she didn't participate in any violence. And I want to add one more point. If we compare with the Yunnan attack, the police force haven't arrested any suspect on the site and haven't prosecute any one of the arrestee for more than a week. But the protest in Central, it just happened several days ago, and it is very, very rare for the police force to prosecute so many suspects in such a short period. I strongly believe they have the political motivation to send a message to the protester, especially those youngsters, to stop attend or participate in any protest in the future.
So as we talk about political tactics and political aspirations moving forward and broadening this out, Edward Chin, looking at the end game, earlier in the program you mentioned that you still support one country, two systems. I wonder, do you believe that that is going to erode as time ticks along, as this standoff continues between the central government and the protesters, where at some point the majority of the protesters are going to want complete independence for Hong Kong?
I relocated back to Hong Kong in the year 2000. I believe in the Deng Xiaoping model, spoken from the mouth of Deng Xiaoping. But currently, the way it is now, I find it very troublesome to see what's going on, because there's a lot of lies, and also like Beijing really should think clearly, why this one country, two systems is failing, and why 2 million people took to the streets. First 1 million, 2 million, and then, like they cherry picked Carrie Lam to be the CE. And then after 2 years it's not working. Maybe they want to make it in such a way that to let Hong Kong people come into a standstill. And then, this is a lot of a conspiracy, but then, like take a look at the history of China. It doesn't really have a very good track record in keeping their promises. And, the only way to do it, honestly, and it has to come from Beijing, is to let Carrie Lam have like more like a town hall meeting every day, like come out, and not just to sit behind and then let the liaison office or, like Beijing spokesperson say, hey, this is their view. Let Hong Kong people solve the issue. Maybe we need a new chief executive, maybe before or after October 1st. Maybe they are doing a global, like opinion search, and then also, like try to cherry pick one or two candidates. Right. I think, like John Zhang could be very good. The former chief, finance chief in Hong Kong could be, a very good candidate. But, he might not want to take this job because it's a dirty job, and whoever is in this hot seat is very difficult. But I think, like to unify Hong Kong people, I think John could be a possible candidate.
Shu Kin Duo. Anthony Dapiran writing in Foreign Policy. The headline is, How China Lost Hong Kong. Subheader, compromise or crackdown are the only options left for Beijing. Are those the only two options?
No.
Heavy compromise or heavy crackdown?
No, there's obviously, Beijing is following this one country, two system strictly, basically letting Hong Kong people managing their own affairs. Of course, you see chaos and protracted demonstration and protests. I would say there's a problem here. First of all, let's respect the law. Rule of law for Hong Kong is one of the cornerstones of this city. This is very precious. Let's not break this cornerstone. And for those rioters, they should be charged and they should be arrested. 44 is not a big number. Remember, out of 1 million or 2 million, that's according to them. And secondly, the Hong Kong government, by Carrie Lam, she has basically apologized twice. And she said that the bill is dead. And I think industry understands, and there's a problem of communication, and they are rethinking of their governance. I think people should give them a chance. At least right now, central government is still standing with the government, local government over there. Of course, ultimately, and most of the time, the affair is really about the Hong Kong people. Hong Kong people are not happy. I know that not happy. If you look at Hong Kong has changed. In the past, Hong Kong, you can look down upon the whole China, the rest of China, because Hong Kong is so developed, so prosperous. But look at Hong Kong today. Hong Kong has lost its position, I would say. It's like a monopoly position. In terms of the port capacity, Hong Kong is being surpassed by Shanghai, Dalian, or Qingdao, many cities in the mainland. In terms of GDP, Shenzhen has surpassed Hong Kong last year. In terms of this stock market capitalization, Shanghai has surpassed Hong Kong last year. So what's left in Hong Kong? I mean, let's respect the rule of law. Let's respect what's left. Hong Kong should work hard.
Lam Cheuk Tung.
It is very disgusting to talk about the rule of law of Hong Kong by Mr. Sui, because the extradition law dispute is about the rule of law of Hong Kong. We strongly oppose to extradite any person in Hong Kong to mainland China, which is under rule of man. It's not a rule of law system. And we all Hong Kong people are furious about the Beijing's policy towards Hong Kong. We talk about one country, two system. The crux is letting Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong and highly autonomy. But for more than 20 years, the Beijing government failed to deliver their promise to let Hong Kong people to elect our chief executive and the legislative council. Therefore, all the political dispute cannot be resolved by a democratic political system. And just like this political crisis of the extradition law dispute, the pro-establishment camp are all the puppets of Beijing. They didn't listen to Hong Kong people and insist the legislation. Therefore, the crisis escalate further and further until this situation.
Okay, well, lots of unanswered questions. Nobody knows in which direction this is going to go. I guess for the short term, although historically godless, the Communist Party could be getting some help from above because a tropical storm is coming. So that'll stop the protests, at least for a short while. But we'll be keeping a close eye on the situation in Hong Kong.
1 or 2 days.
That's hopeful.
Only 2 days. Lam Chuk Ting, Edward Chin, and Shu Kin Duo, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. As millions demand democratic reform in Hong Kong, a similar call is being made in Moscow. The Russian capital is scheduled to hold local elections in September, but several contenders have been barred from running. Officials say it's because they didn't collect enough signatures to stand. The banned candidates say it's simply because they're opposed to the current leadership. Normally, local elections don't get this much attention in Russia, so why is it different this time? Take a look.
Перешли к активным действиям, попыткам перекрытия дорог, блокированию улиц, нападения на полицейских. Они просто вынудили полицию применять силу. Let's go to our panel in Moscow. Anna Arutunyan is a senior Russia analyst at the International Crisis Group and author of the book, The Putin Mystique. Sergei Markov is a former Russian MP and was a spokesman for President Vladimir Putin. And Tanya Lokshina is the Associate Director for Europe and Central Asia at Human Rights Watch. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Let me start with you, Anna. These protests, were they a threat to President Putin at all?
There's two things here. There's the question of, are they actually a threat? And there's the question of, how does the Kremlin see them? And I think, alas, unfortunately, what's coming to the fore is the fact that the Kremlin perceives them as a threat actually creates more of a problem than it needs to be. This is why we're seeing such a disproportionate use of force for a protest that otherwise could have been dealt with by other means and would not really have posed that much of a threat at all.
Sergei Markov, about 1,400 people detained. It could carry a sentence of up to 15 years. From a few thousand people that protested, it could be as high as 20,000. It could be as low as about 3,000. With that in mind, Anna's right, isn't she? The Kremlin has perceived this as a threat. So why has it?
You know, Kremlin has a realistic approach. We can see the Ukraine nearby, where United States intelligence service organized the coup and overthrow democratic elected Ukrainian president and imposed dictatorship, repressive regime. And of course, Kremlin taking this success in account and has to take, has to understand that the same who organized the coup in Kiev in 2014 now are try to organize same in Moscow. Of course, there are big differences. Vladimir Putin, very popular president. It's differ from unpopularity of Ukrainian President Yanukovych, and also Russian people very much patriotic people.
But Mr. Markov, okay,
nevertheless,
certainly. So the Russian government wants to take precautions, but there's been no evidence whatsoever that there's any foreign hand behind these protests. All the available evidence shows that it's opposition members who are saying we don't qualify, we're being left out of this vote, we want more democracy in Russia. So even in the absence of any evidence that there's a color revolution or foreign interference, you still think it's right to clamp down?
As I know, Alexei Navalny, who is a key figure of those protests, is strongly supported by United States and European Union. And European Union also already published its report on the night, on the Saturday and between Saturday and Sunday. As I believe in European Union countries, even shopping centers doesn't work on Sunday.
But doesn't it? Yeah, but doesn't it, Mr. Markov, doesn't it suggest that there's a great insecurity here among the government? Because if President Putin is so popular, then all it takes is for the European Union and the Americans to say, we like this guy, for the government to go and crack down and put 1,000 people in jail. Doesn't it show insecurity rather than strength?
Or maybe I didn't say a very important point. Organizer of those protests don't want to follow the law. They are provocating clashes with police. Moscow authority giving them very good places for their meetings, but they all the time want to organize their meetings on in other places. So provocations, the clashes, is clear goal of the organizers of the meeting.
Tanya Lokshina, are the protesters provoking the authorities?
As far as we can see, there is no evidence whatsoever of protesters provoking the authorities. This is a very straightforward matter, in fact. The protest has to do with the right to free and fair election. In Moscow, numerous candidates attempted to register for the vote for the city legislature. The elections are coming up in early September. So it just happened somehow, coincidentally, that the most viable opposition candidate, those who really did have strong chances at making it to the Moscow legislature, did not get registered. And the reason they did not get registered is not because they did not get enough signatures. They did. It's just that the authorities effectively argued that over 10% of their signatures are flawed. And they cited different reasons, including in particular specific individuals who signed but who did not seem to be on the official list of voters.
But it is, Tanya,
personal data.
Tanya, it is still plausible that some of the prospective candidates didn't get enough signatures, A, or got fake signatures, B. I mean, we can't be sure that some of them didn't get fake signatures, right?
Problem is that Moscow election legislation is really quite muddled up. And this whole issue of signature verification has been problematic for a long time. The process of verification is very murky and extremely non-transparent. And it's not Tanya Lokshina from Human Rights Watch, a foreign organization, who's saying, well, this process is not transparent and flawed. It is, in fact, the presidential Council for
Okay.
Human Rights.
Okay.
There is Mr. Putin's own Human
Right.
Rights Council,
Okay.
who's basically saying the process is so flawed
Right.
that only candidates who gathered enough signatures should be really allowed to register for this particular election.
Certainly. And Sergei Markov, one of the reasons why I really appreciate you coming on the program, because you are extremely transparent about a lot of things. As somebody who worked within the system, is this how it works? You said Russia is a very pragmatic and realistic country. Is this how it works? When there are elections, especially even if it's just local Duma elections, if there are people who are against the interests of Russia, you exclude them. And you say, I'm sorry, you didn't get the right signatures or your signatures are flawed. Is that just the way things work?
No. The fact that Alexei Navalny and Sobol and some others, they're agent of Americans, doesn't mean they should be not allowed to take part in elections. They should allowed. Frankly speaking, the barrier for the collection signature are quite high in Moscow. It's not so easy to collect them, but more difficult for the organizers of this, like Navalny, to collect signatures because they're against Crimea rejoining Russia. But this Crimea rejoining Russia is supported by more than 90% of Russian population. So how the guy who is against 90% of the population can collect signatures? Of course, it's very difficult to do. That's why I think they didn't collect really such signatures, but they have enough activist supporters to organize this the clashes between police. And this is coordinated with United States Intelligence Service.
Anna Arutunya, this is a city Duma vote. Some people might say, it's so small, why is it getting all this attention? It's just a local vote. But are we seeing this little city Duma vote being a microcosm of the bigger politics at play in Russia? Can we say that?
I think we can. I mean, like I said, I think there's several things going on here, and very much of this is about perception. It's about mutual perception, and it's about mutual misperception. Now, for the protesters, I think this is about something different than it is for the Kremlin. For the protesters, since 2012, we've seen an opposition movement that has considerably expanded and considerably strengthened itself in terms of its literacy as citizens, its literacy in legal issues, its ability to organize and get things done. Now, this organization is not about regime change. It's about actually acting as citizens. It's about making decisions on a local level about, I don't know, city parks or policies. It's basically a growing civil society. Now, a civil society needs to be engaged in the political process, and it needs to have room to grow. Now, we're seeing a situation where the Kremlin, which is actually interested in having a normal, decent civil society, is not prepared to deal with what comes with that. And what comes with that is that these people are practicing their agency. The Kremlin, on the other hand, sees it in an entirely different light. It sees this as an existential threat that's about regime change. It sees every protest as potentially something that can be organized from abroad and used as a vehicle of foreign policy intervention for regime change. Again, I don't see any evidence of that actually happening, but the perception of that is very strong in the Kremlin. And another thing is that they're very afraid that the government elites, like the process within the elites, people within the elites will see this as an aspect of instability, and then we're going to see this instability spread to the actual government. This is where the fear is coming from. Now, to what extent it's founded or unfounded, again, we're dealing with a lot of very subjective perceptions here, and that means that there's also limited options on how to act. So we're just going to have to see how this plays out in the next couple of years. And I mean, my only suggestion to both sides is not to overestimate and not to escalate.
Right. Sergei Markov, there's one thing that's a bit confusing about what the state says about Navalny. Having done the show over a period of a few years, and seen the evolution of Navalny in the public sphere. Sometimes we get the Russian state perspective, which is Navalny is not a threat. He only got 2% of a vote or a poll. The last time he was polled, he's out of step with what the Russian people want. He's a nobody. He can never win. And on the other hand, we hear he's a CIA agent, he's a Western agent, he's a threat to the state. How can it be both at the same time?
Very easily. Alexei Navalny, he's very constant on his position. His political position 100% same as position of the American intelligence service community. And because of this, he has no chances to get real popular support from Russian people, because Russian people quite patriotic one. And at the same time, because he is a political ally of the United States intelligence service community, it's a very strong community. You know, they organize the coup already in many countries of the world. Of course, Navalny as himself not the threat, but American intelligence service community who use Alexei Navalny and some others as their weapons is the real threat. And of course, I want to discuss with Anna, which I know and respect, but nevertheless, Russian authority doesn't regard any political process as orchestrated from outside. Protest in social issue, 90% of them has no support and organizing from abroad. But those who are organized by Navalny, they 100% organized from abroad.
So I'm not going to ask Anna to address that. I'm actually going to ask Tanya Lokshina to address that, because I think Human Rights Watch would have a closer handle of this. Is that true, that 90% of civil society protests are allowed and they go smoothly? It's just some of those that have the hand of Navalny and his ilk, those are the ones that are cracked down on. Address that for me.
No, that is definitely not the case. We've been documenting violent dispersals of peaceful protests in different regions of the country for years and years now. I would say that the authorities in Russia cracked down on peaceful protesters with particular intensity starting 2012, that is the year when Mr. Putin started his third presidential term. We documented protests being dispersed and participants being arbitrarily detained and ill-treated by police in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Nizhny Novgorod, and other large Russian cities. So I would definitely disagree with Mr. Markov here. Also, I do not quite understand the emphasis that's being made on Navalny in particular. This protest, the protest on July 27, is not specifically about Navalny, though Navalny is, of course, one of the most recognizable faces of the Russian opposition. It is about specific individuals who gathered the sufficient number of signatures to get registered for the city legislative assembly vote, and who are saying that the authorities' claims that some of their signatures were fake are simply not correct, and for given no opportunity to contest the decision of the authorities. The people that we saw in the street just a couple of days ago, they were saying, let those candidates run. Give them a chance to run. That's all we are asking for. Give them a chance to run, because we want to make a difference as far as decision-making processes are concerned.
Anna, very finally, you spoke a little bit about mutual suspicions. Is there egg on the face of some of the opposition when they suggest things like, and Navalny himself, he suggested this, that maybe he was poisoned while he's been in detention, and according to the best available evidence, he had flu-like symptoms or even extreme hay fever-like symptoms, right? I mean, from the outside looking in, if somebody's going to be poisoned by the Kremlin, you think of polonium, right? So by suggesting that the Kremlin's poisoning him and then he's quite healthy the next day, is that embarrassing for the opposition?
I mean, look, I don't really want to, I don't know why Navalny started suddenly exhibiting the symptoms that he was exhibiting. I do think we should be very careful, everybody should be very careful about jumping to conclusions about poisoning. And if it is poisoning, and again, I do not know, I honestly find these symptoms very suspicious. At the same time, what was the intent of the poisoning? Who did it? Why? We just don't know this. And to use this as fodder to paint the other side as having an intent that it does not necessarily have at that stage, you might actually be locking your opponent to act in precisely the way that you are accusing him of acting in. That, I think, is a very dangerous mode. And I mean, I see the Kremlin using this approach more than the opposition, but at the same time, by cracking down so hard on the opposition, many of whom are not actually that radical and do not actually have very radical goals, but are simply protesting about their right to run for the city council elections. I think what actually starts happening is there's a radicalization process, and that happens on both sides. But I mean, in some ways, yes, to accuse the Kremlin of things that maybe had a different explanation will actually start locking the Kremlin in actions, in a pattern of actions that one would not want it to take.
Okay, we're keeping a close eye on the situation. As far as we understand, the Moscow mayor's office has given approval for another protest on the 3rd of August. Let's see what happens. Anna, Sergey, and Tanya, it's been a pleasure to talk to all of you. Thanks so much. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, France says it'll spend billions of dollars on a space force. But why does it need one? We'll debate if militarizing outer space will make people on Earth safer. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.